Welcome again, everyone. We begin with Russia's President Vladimir Putin's renewed warning to Ukraine, saying Moscow will use all weapons at its disposal against Kyiv if it were to acquire nuclear arms. He was speaking at a press conference in Kazakhstan. In his words, if the country, which we are essentially at war with, now becomes a nuclear power, what do we do in this case? We will use all, I want to emphasize this, precisely all means of destruction available to Russia. His comments come after the New York Times reported last week that some unidentified Western officials had suggested U.S. President Joe Biden could give Ukraine nuclear weapons before he leaves office. President Putin also said it was practically impossible for Ukraine to produce a nuclear weapon, but that it might be able to make what he called some kind of dirty bomb, which is a conventional bomb laced with radioactive material in order to spread contamination. If it does so, Mr. Putin says Russia would respond appropriately.
Такие заявления могут делать только безответственные люди, которые ни за что не отвечают.
Meanwhile, his counterpart in Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, believes Mr. Putin's promotion of Russia's new hypersonic missile is aimed at disrupting attempts to end the war. Speaking in his usual nightly video address, he said Mr. Putin wants to escalate the situation in order to thwart U.S. President-elect Donald Trump's attempts to end the war. President Zelensky said Ukraine and its allies are interested in peace, calling for the country to strengthen its positions and that of its partners. He also responded to Russia's second big attack on Ukraine's energy infrastructure this month, saying Kyiv must respond together to Russia's actions. And speaking of that attack on the Ukraine's energy infrastructure, authorities say over 1 million people lost power in the immediate aftermath of the strikes, and millions more had their existing schedule of rolling power cuts intensified. Kyiv has plunged into darkness on Thursday in Russia's attack on Ukraine's interior minister, saying energy infrastructure facilities were damaged in 9 regions. Ukraine's state grid operator, Ukrenergo, also announced deep power cuts across the country because of damage from the attacks, warning of at least 12 hours without electricity for some consumers. Meanwhile, U.S. President Joe Biden has responded to Russia's overnight aerial attack on Ukraine, calling it outrageous and horrific. President Biden said in a statement that the attack serves as a reminder of the urgency and importance of supporting the Ukrainian people in the fight against Russia. Russia's President Vladimir Putin, who defended the attack, said Moscow struck in response to Ukraine's strikes on Russian territory with U.S. medium-range missiles. He said Russia's future targets could include decision-making centers in Kyiv. In the meantime, Ukraine is calling on its allies to speed up military aid to the country. The spokesperson for Ukraine's foreign ministry says quicker delivery of critical battlefield equipment is more essential than drafting more men. It comes as a senior U.S. administration official said that Ukraine is not mobilizing enough new soldiers to replace those lost on the battlefield, and urged Kyiv to reduce the mobilization age from 25 to 18.
And we expect those countries that have urged everyone to avert expanding of the war to react to the statements voiced by Putin today. It is very important if we treat it fairly. These are the statements. This blackmail is the expansion of war and the threat of expansion of war, an acceptable one. And Putin obviously tries to influence the new US administration by those statements, and he tries to basically show that this new administration is weak. He tries to test their resolve, and show that he only wants war. He only wants war, and he only wants to expand his aggression. But again, we are now in a situation when we need more equipment to arm all the people that have already been mobilized. And we think that the first priority is to send quicker and faster military aid. I can refute that this is a point of tension or that is being discussed in a critical or negative manner. Yes, we discuss it, and I would say that Ukraine actually initiates this discussion usually at our negotiations, and we inform our partners about the dynamics and the numbers of the mobilization that we have in Ukraine, and then we discuss it with partners. This is part of the discussion as much as other topics such as the provision of weapons, the strategies, the defense, the sanctions, the deterrence.
Let's get more on this. Retired U.S. Army Captain and National Defense and Military Strategist Captain Bish Johnson joins us to discuss this. Great to have you on the program. Thank you for joining us.
Good evening, and thank you for having me.
Right, so Russia yesterday did admit to striking Ukraine's energy grid in response to Kyiv's use of Western weapons to strike into Russia. It says it'll use even more new missiles to strike Ukraine. Let's get your reaction to all of the dynamics playing out here.
Well, let me say this, that Ukraine is at its weakest point now since the war began, with the last U.S. election in which Donald Trump defeated the Democrats, who have been strong supporters and allies of the Ukrainians. And so the Ukrainians cannot further this war in the manner that they will be able to recover all of the territories that were taken over by the Russians, with, of course, with the exception of Crimea, without the kind of support that the Democrats had provided to the Ukrainians. So at this point in time, the Ukrainians are at a very weak point. The war is not progressing in a way that they would have wished it's been progressing. So their only option right now is if the Europeans can pick up the slack that the Americans may provide whenever Donald Trump is sworn into office in January, which the Europeans may not likely have that capacity to be able to make up for what America was providing. So the Ukrainians are in a very precarious situation, and I don't see it getting any better from whatever Ukrainians has to do internally, because it takes a while for you to build all this military industrial complex infrastructure to be able to provide the kind of military support that you get internally to be able to effectively defend your territory, especially against a more powerful and a bigger military like the Russian military.
Right. Do you think Russian President Vladimir Putin is aware, of what you just said, and believes that he's in a strong place because the Europeans may not be able to make up or fill the gaps that U.S. may be leaving once President Biden is no longer president of the United States?
Yes, Putin has been around on the global stage for a while. He's been in office for over 20 years, either as president of Russia or as prime minister that he was. So he understands that the best way to fight the West is time. With time, you'll be able to wear them out. And this is because the Americans and the West have this democratic system of government where every 4 years there will be an election. And the outcome of the elections are usually unpredictable. So he knows that he will wear the West out by prolonging this war. And that is why you saw him continuing to prolong and protract the war, believing that at some point he's going to wear the West out. And I think by January 20th, that point will be on the doorstep of the Ukrainians. And so I have no doubt that Putin knows what he's doing. This guy is a master strategist. He's been around for a while. There is no part of the world that he does not understand the dynamics. especially the West. So he knows what he's doing, and he knows what was going to happen should the Democrats lose the election. And eventually that's what happened.
Right, and outside of this, what kind of message do you think that Russia is, trying to send out to the international community and to the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky through these latest attacks on Ukraine?
Russia knows that once Donald Trump is sworn in, there will be need for negotiation because Donald Trump is going to call for negotiations to end this war. And the best way to negotiate in any situation is to put yourself in a position of strength. And so the Russians, what they have done is to put themselves in a position of strength. So that way they don't have to give up much during negotiation, because eventually they will give up something to get something. But they will give up less now that they are much stronger position than they would have had they been in a much weaker position. So the Ukrainians are on the back foot. So the Ukrainians eventually may have to lose more than to gain the peace that they're looking for. Russia is stronger, with the backing of North Koreans and with these new missiles that they just launched, and with the kind of attacks, about 190 projectiles that was launched within a matter of hours. So plus they've been making incremental progress in various places, particularly in eastern Ukraine, in the Donbass and Donetsk regions. So they are making incremental progress. So they are in a much stronger position for any negotiation. When the Ukrainians invaded the Russian territory some months ago, what they were trying to do is to try to put themselves in that much stronger position so that they will have to say, okay, for us to give up this, you have to give us that. But I don't think that they have that much sway with what is happening right now.
Right, and do you agree with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's comments where he said that Mr. Putin's use of Russia's new hypersonic missile is aimed at disrupting attempts to end the war?
Yes, if you use that kind of weapon, I think you're not leaving room for negotiation, because what is going to happen is that you're going to cause even mass destruction and mass casualties. And so your opponent will have no other option than to just give up. But let me also say this. The Ukrainians made very strategic mistake in their history as a country. Ukraine used to be a part of the former Soviet Republic, as we know. And so when the Soviet crashed in 1991, there were only 4 of those republics where you had nuclear weapons, and Ukraine was one of them. And with all the nuclear weapons that were within the territory of the Ukrainians were the 3rd nuclear power in the world. And so they went into, security pact with the Russians and the Americans, and they were able to transfer their nuclear weapons. Not only do they have nuclear warheads, they had the warheads, and they also have intercontinental ballistic missiles that we are capable, that we deliver those warheads to any place that they had wanted. So, but with the pact, the security pact that they had with the Russians and the Americans, with the Russians violated by invading them, those nuclear warheads and their delivery systems were delivered to Russia. And so that now put them in a very strategic weak point. Had they not made that strategic mistake and those nuclear warheads were still be in their country as we speak, this invasion wouldn't have taken place in the first place. Because sometimes why countries embark on this nuclear weapon program is for deterrence. Because no mad person will know that you have nuclear weapons and they will still attack you. It's mostly for deterrence. And so they lost that deterrence factor when they entered into that security pact with the Russians and the Americans that caused them to transfer their nuclear warheads and their delivery system to Russia. And so, yes, Russia can pretty much do whatever it wants right now, particularly with Biden, a lame duck president, because Biden has been their staunchest supporter and financier of this war. I don't know what the Ukrainians could have done without the support of the Americans and the West. It's not possible. It's not something they could have. There's nothing they could have done.
And are there concerns as regards future attacks on energy infrastructure? Russia also says it may concentrate on, decision-making infrastructure as well. We know that the winter is coming, we're almost in the heart of it, and it's going to be a tough time without power, both for, the residents who are bearing the brunt of the war, and of course, those in the battlefield as well.
Yeah, that has been the long-term strategy of the Russians since this war began almost 3 years ago. They have always focused on their energy infrastructure. This is not the first time. There's always been repeated attacks on Ukrainians' energy infrastructure, particularly power, throughout the course of this almost 3-year war. So it will continue. I don't see that, abating anytime soon, because that is a strategy that the Russians have used very effectively to put the Ukrainians even in a much weaker position. So I don't think that they will stop doing that. Whenever you are at war with an enemy, whatever works for you, you will continue to do that. And this has been working for the Russians. And as far as attacking their decision making centers, with that kind of weapons that the Russians are using, they will wear out whatever missile defense system that the Ukrainians have in place. And they may be successful in attacking those decision-making centers. As you are aware, they are using all this weapon that, you have other smaller weapons. Once you fire the major weapon, there are smaller weapons that scattered all over several places and several miles and then cause destruction. With that kind of weapons, it's very difficult for weapon defense system to get all of them neutralized or intercepted. So some of them will eventually penetrate and can hit whatever target that the Russians, had intended to hit.
Right, and you understand the dynamics of, warfare and, what it takes, when two countries or more are, on each other's throats, what it means. Of course, there's been attempts to mediate this, to get a peace deal between Israel and Hezbollah, the third day of their ceasefire right now. People are hoping that there will be peace on the long run. With what we've seen so far, do you think that might be on the table soon? Or do you think that a country like Ukraine may fall to its knees?
If I think like a country like Ukraine may do what?
Fall to its knees, since Russia is really bombarding them at this time.
At this point in time, Ukraine is at a very weak position, and them not having the support of the U.S. like they've had during the Biden administration, the Ukrainians eventually will have to give up something. I don't know what they're going to give up, but whatever they're going to give up is going to be significant, because they're no longer having that support that the Biden administration is providing for them. I don't think that Donald Trump is going to go with the same strategy that the Biden administration did. They're not going to keep funding the Ukrainians with the hundreds of billions of dollars of American taxpayers' money, as was done under the Biden administration. So something will give in. The Ukrainians eventually is going to give in. Now, as far as, Hezbollah and the Israelis, it just remains to be seen whether that, ceasefire deal is going to last. One thing that has been very, very evident, in that part of the world is that, ceasefire deals don't usually last. One party is going to, whether it's Hamas or Hezbollah or one party is going to fire one projectile into the territory of the other person. And by the time, the ceasefire is broken, and then they're back at each other's neck again. So, but, we'll watch and see what happens.
Right. Captain Bish Johnson, thank you again for your analysis and your time today on the program.
Thank you for having me.